A mile away from
I'd like to continue with the education that we provide. We provide no and low-cost small business educational assistance to all of our businesses. The training opportunities are being added to our website all the time, and you can find them by visiting the South Carolina SBDC.eCenterDirect.com/events. Most training is available at no cost or low cost to our clients. You can also watch our YouTube channels for prior webinars that we've had and join us on Facebook as well. We provide a numerous resources to our clients that call in. We provide no-cost marketing research assistance, project feasibility assessment, and referrals to resource partners. So if you're in need of additional assistance, we can refer your small business to resource partners that will make an impact for your small business. Now I'd like to move into the employment law part of our series. Employment law is related to COVID-19, and introduce our panelists. Today, we have with us Ashley Cuttino. Ashley is a partner with Ogletree Deakins and a national labor and employment, Ogletree Deakins, a national labor and employment specialty firm. In response to the COVID pandemic, Ashley has led Ogletree Deakins nationwide unemployment response team. In this role, Ashley tracks unemployment changes nationwide and provides counsel to clients on unemployment-related issues. In addition, Ashley is the co-chair of the Ogletree COVID-19 Litigation Practice Group. COVID-19 litigation involves all areas of employment law, as well as personal injury-related claims. In this role, Ashley has been able to utilize her substantial past litigation experience that includes employment litigation, personal injury litigation, medical malpractice defense, and complex toxic tort defense. Outside of COVID-19, Ashley concentrates her practice in management side employment litigation, includes defending claims against wage and hour, discrimination, wrongful discharge, and breach of contract. Ashley specializes in complex litigation, class action, and multi-plaintiff litigation. I'd like to yield the floor to Ashley so she can tell us a little bit more about Ogletree Deakins.
Hi, thanks, Katrina. That was a super introduction for me. I appreciate it. So Ogletree Deakins, so we're a labor and employment specialty firm, much like Chase's firm. So I know you guys are spread out across the state. So Ogletree has offices in Greenville, Columbia, and in Charleston, so that we can service really the entire state. And then we also have offices all across the country. But like Katrina said, I have been one of the leads and tips of the Ogletree sphere in response to COVID-19. So as we go through this presentation today, if you have questions, we have some pre-prepared for you guys, but feel free to put them in the chat box. And I am glad to kind of take them off the cuff and give you the answers that you guys need.
Thank you, Ashley. Our next guest speaker is Chase Samples. Chase is a principal in the Greenville, South Carolina office of Jackson Lewis. His practice covers the spectrum of employment litigation, including both state and federal claims, and individual and class action suits. In recent years, most of Chase's practice has been in the area of wage and hour law. He defends corporations and organizations against class and collective actions under the Fair Labor Standards Act and state law. He also advises clients on wage and hour compliance issues. He is a member of the editorial board of the firm's quarterly class action trend report. As an undergraduate, Chase was elected to Phi Beta Kappa and won the Phi Sigma Alpha 2005 National Prize for Best Undergraduate Honor Thesis. While attending law school, he served on the editorial board of the Georgia Law Review. Actively involved in the law school's advocacy program, he won the National Trial Competition Regional Tournament and serves as vice chairman of the Mock Trial Executive Board. Chase was awarded the Ronald Carlson Award for Excellence in the Study of Evidence, and he was a member of the Joseph Henry Lumpkin Inn of Court and the Order of the Coif and National Order of Barristers. After law school, he clerked for 2 years for the Honorable Henry F. Floyd, U.S. District Judge for the District of South Carolina. So I'd like to yield the floor to Chase so he could tell us a little bit more about Jackson Lewis.
Yeah, thanks, Katrina, and good afternoon, everyone. Great to be with you and great to be with Ashley as well and with SBDC. Just a little bit about Jackson Lewis. Like Ogletree, we're a national labor and employment law firm. We've got over 900 attorneys spread throughout the country. Through our Greenville office in South Carolina, we have 15 attorneys who represent companies across the state and really across the country, dealing with anything from our motto used to be all we do is work. So really anything related to the workplace, with the exception of workers' comp, we handle. That would include harassment, discrimination type claims, wage and hour issues, immigration, employee benefits, and like I said, basically anything except workers' comp. Glad to be with you guys. This is still an exciting topic. It continues, over the past year that our answers to these questions have evolved and changed. So look forward to speaking with y'all and hearing what Ashley has to say as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chase. Thank you both, Ashley and Chase, for joining us today. Before we move into the employment law related to COVID Q&A session, I'd like to introduce our committee members. Alan Brown, he spearheaded this whole webinar event, and I want to thank him so much for his hard work. Alan, would you like to say a few words?
Katrina, I don't believe Alan is on the call.
I'm sorry. Okay. Well, I'm going to then punt this to Gary Robinson. Gary is on the call. And Gary, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, I'm glad to see everyone on this call. It's a very important subject matter. So I'm hoping that you guys get a great deal out of this. And please be sure to attend the rest of the series. So this is a 4-part series. And again, this entire team, myself, Ben, Katrina, and Alan, we worked very hard to pull this together. So glad you're here and hope you get a lot out of it.
Great. Thank you so much, Gary. And we have Benjamin Greenswig. Carolyn, do we have Benjamin on the call?
He is not on the call.
Okay, thank you so much.
And one quick thing, Katrina, before you get into the Q&A format, if those that are attending, if you have not done so, please type your full name into the chat box to confirm your attendance. I still have a few people out there, one with just initials, actually 2 with just initials, AJ and SPW. But if you could please share with us your full name so we can confirm your attendance. Also, at the end of the presentation, we'll be sending out a post-event survey so you can give us some feedback on this format. And it really helps Katrina and the members continue to improve these presentations and provide exactly what y'all are looking for. So sorry for that little bit of plug on housekeeping, Miss Katrina, but you can go ahead and take it away.
Well, Carolyn, we're not that formal around here, so we appreciate you giving us a little bit of housekeeping tips and also providing us with your services today. I want to give a special thanks to Carolyn. She's been wonderful to work with. So as we move into the next phase of our program, which is our Q&A session, we have some questions that have already come in. And I want to start by directing our first question to Chase. Chase, if I require a mask in my workplace and my employees refuse to wear it, what should I do? Or should I make a mask wearing a requirement?
It's a good question, Katrina, and a great one to start with. I mean, there's a lot in this. We'll try to unpack it. And it's a question we've been getting a lot from, especially over the last several months, as more and more companies are returning back to full-time, work in the workplace. I think the first thing you want to do in terms of whether you, what do you do if the employee refuses to wear the mask? Well, I think you need to have a discussion with the employee. Find out, first of all, why are they refusing to wear the mask? If it's just because they don't want to wear one, then I would treat it as I would any other sort of discipline conduct issue. And, you could potentially write the employee up for it. If they continue to refuse, you could consider suspending them until they're willing to wear the mask. But again, their reason for why they're not wearing it is important here. And you'll hear this from us a lot today as we talk about some of the different things related to COVID. If their reason for refusing is because they have a medical condition, or maybe they have a religious objection to doing so, then you have to treat it like you would any request for an accommodation in the workplace and have a discussion with the employee about that. If they work in their own private office, then you might consider allowing them to not wear the mask in that area. You might consider only requiring the mask if they're in close proximity to others. Telework would be an option to consider. Reassignment might be an option to consider. I would consider that as a last resort. And I know Ashley's going to get into some of these things later when we're talking about sort of the burden on the employer. So I'll stop there for now. But really, it depends on why the employee is refusing to wear the mask. And as you all know, I mean, we're here in South Carolina, mask wearing is, for better or worse, it's become a sort of a political issue. And so a lot of employers are getting pushback on mask requirements. So that leads to Katrina's second question is, should I make mask wearing mandatory? And I think it really depends on your workforce and, what your culture is, what you do as a company. If you're in an office environment where everybody has their own space, then mask wearing probably isn't that important. Whereas if you're customer facing and you're interacting closely with the public, or your employees are close together, mask wearing is something you should certainly strongly consider. For the short term, in terms of what I've been hearing, companies that have been requiring masks are continuing to do so in the short term, but I think we have to continue to watch COVID and see what happens. I think as the numbers continue to decline and work continues to resume as normal in a lot of places, I think you'll see more and more companies drop those mask requirements. But in the short term, I know companies are continuing to do so, or at least if they're thinking about phasing it out, they're looking to do so in the summer, really just depending on, what the numbers look like. Ashley, are you seeing anything different?
Yeah, the only thing I think add to what Chase is saying is that whether you're a big or a small business, it's really important that you keep up with and continue to check both the CDC and the OSHA guidelines. And I think one thing that's really important, and it kind of goes to the second question that I'm going to tackle, is they are the best guidelines that employers can follow to protect themselves. And it's important for you to have a clear understanding with your employees about what your expectations are. One recent change that we've seen in the last week is both the CDC and now OSHA have come out and they have given different guidelines for what your expectations can be for your vaccinated versus your unvaccinated employees. So you are now able to treat those employees who are vaccinated differently from unvaccinated employees. But you have to make the rules really clear to do that. But one of the big difference with masks is if you are vaccinated, then the CDC and OSHA have both said you no longer need to wear a mask and you no longer need to social distance from other people. and you don't have the same quarantine requirements if you do come in close contact with someone who is who's COVID positive. Now, if you make the choice not to be vaccinated, the old guidelines are still thought of as the best practice, which is that you should be wearing a mask and you should be social distancing and you should be quarantining if you're unvaccinated. Now, part of what that means, though, is that to really enforce those rules, you need to ask your employees if they're vaccinated or not vaccinated. If you choose to do that, you don't need to ask any question other than, are you vaccinated? Are you not vaccinated? And then you need to know the last date of their vaccination, because under these guidelines, you are considered fully vaccinated, meaning you can take off your mask 2 weeks after you've gotten your last shot. So if you get a Pfizer or Moderna vaccine, it would be 2 weeks after your second shot. If your employee got the J&J, it would be 2 weeks after the J&J shot. So we have lots of employers who are just simply asking that question. And if you are vaccinated, then they're allowing you to remove your mask. And if you choose to be unvaccinated, that is your choice. But you continue to wear that mask if you are following the guidelines of the CDC and OSHA. That is, one way that you're able to go right now. If you do ask that question, though, any recording of their answers that you get, you should treat like a medical record and make sure it's protected in that same way. And don't collect any information that you don't need. All you need to know is, are they or aren't they, and what date can they be considered fully vaccinated to take off that mask?
Great, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ashley. The only, just to follow up on that, a lot of companies have been asking us, how do we incentivize folks to get the vaccine? And I think Ashley just laid out a good option. If your policy has been to require masks, but you want to incentivize folks to get the vaccine, then you can say you still have to wear a mask unless you provide us proof of your vaccination. And that might be one way to sort of subtly encourage employees to get vaccinated. But I think the voluntary component there also protects you from a lot of the legal pitfalls from folks who don't want to get vaccinated for whatever reason. They've still got that mask requirement as an option.
That's right. And for incentives for this group, since you're all small businesses, I'm assuming you're small enough that you would fall under this rule, but under the federal policy, the FFCRA, you can also give people paid time off to go get their vaccines, and then the government will reimburse you for that paid time off that you gave your employees. So you can provide paid time off and not actually be losing any money out of pocket. You'll lose your employee for an hour or two, but you won't be out of pocket money to pay them to actually go get their vaccination if you want to encourage it.
Awesome, thank you so much. This next question goes to Ashley. If I get a claim from someone stating that they've contracted COVID on the job and they are trying to collect workers' comp, should I open a claim against my insurance?
Yeah, so let's preface this question. I want to make sure everybody understands the wording of the question because it's important. So let's assume you have an employee who just calls you and says they have COVID. You then need to be following quarantine procedures just like always. However, it's that next part of Katrina's question that's important. If they say that they contracted COVID at work, then I do suggest that you contact your workers' compensation carrier. And here's the reason why. South Carolina has actually passed a liability protection law that protects employers from any claim that an employee or a customer contracted COVID from your workforce. You are protected from liability from that claim as long as you were following the best practices, the CDC guidelines, the OSHA guidelines, and you weren't grossly negligent. You weren't just saying, to heck with it all, do what you want, right? You're going to be protected from liability. But it is a protection from liability. It is not a prohibition that somebody can file the lawsuit. So if someone claims that they contracted COVID at the workplace, I suggest you do report it to your workers' comp carrier. I would be careful about your language. Don't confirm that they got it at work. Say there is an accusation that they got it at work, because we don't want any admissions. You also need to look at the OSHA guidelines on whether or not that's a reportable and recordable event under OSHA. I would encourage you to look at it, because when you have to record and report to OSHA a COVID contraction at work, it literally is changing day to day. So look up OSHA to see if you have any reporting requirements there. But yes, if someone directly says they think they got it at work as an employee, you want your workers' comp carrier to defend that claim for you. I will say we are not seeing a lot of those claims because of this act. And the plaintiff's attorneys know that they've got a pretty big hurdle to jump to prove gross negligence. So we're not seeing a large volume of those claims. But yes, you pay for that insurance for a reason. It's to defend you.
There is a question that may coincide with your answer, Ashley. Costas, who is one of our consultants here at the South Carolina Small Business Development Center, has asked, what ramifications could a business or an employee face if he or she claimed to be fully vaccinated when they weren't and got someone sick at the workplace?
Yeah, so so you have two options. So one, you can ask for their actual vaccination card. You can either take a copy of it and keep it in a safe file, medical file. You can have them show it to you, or you can just take their word of mouth. If you later find out that person has lied about their vaccination status, that would absolutely be subject to discipline. And if you call me, I'm going to tell you that you can certainly fire them for that, because they are putting others at risk. And that is the thing we do not want to have happen. So I would make real clear that, if you're doing it, honesty is the best policy on that, subsequent revelation would be subject to discipline, right? Up to and including termination. As far as, somebody else then getting someone sick, again, it goes back to that workers' comp liability law. They would have to show it was gross negligence. It's hard to pin that on an employer when someone is lying to you, as long as you're asking the right question.
Ashley, another question from Robert Evans, and thank you, Robert. How does HIPAA law affect asking an employee getting the vaccine and acting upon that information?
Okay, sure. So HIPAA actually doesn't apply at all, but your question still does. It's not HIPAA. None of you are going to be covered by HIPAA because you're not under what HIPAA does. But the EEOC has made it, and the CDC have made it very clear that any document, any record that you have that shows vaccination status or confirms the vaccination status should be treated just like a medical record. So like if you had an injury on the job, if you have anything else, it should be kept in a file that is secure, whether it's electronic or physical, and separate from HR records. And only those people with a need to know should have access to that file. So you protect it just like you do any other medical file. And when you say act upon that information, the only act that you should be taking based on that information is allowing the person to not wear a mask, allowing the person to not social distance. And then again, there are different quarantine requirements now based on what happens. So let's assume that Chase and I work right next to each other. Chase, I'm going to make you my sick person. I am vaccinated. I am fully vaccinated. I got the Pfizer. I got it when the teachers got it. Chase did not get vaccinated. Chase becomes COVID positive. What the employer should then do, you should still alert me that I have been in contact with someone who has had COVID-19 so that I can monitor myself for symptoms. But I do not have to quarantine anymore because I am vaccinated. I only have to quarantine if I start showing COVID symptoms. Chase, on the other hand, is COVID positive, right? He's got to go home and quarantine just like he's had to do for the last year and a half until he's COVID free and okay to come back to work. I think I answered that question and much more with that.
You did, and I want to
Okay.
interject something that Ashley said is that you want to maintain files, your medical files, separate from your employment files. So do not store your medical files in your employment files. These should be in a locked cabinet, only accessible to those who need to know. So I do want to make sure that that is made clear.
Well, and this
Okay,
is,
so-
this, Katrina, this will be separate from the personnel records. Is that
From
correct?
the personnel, right, from the personnel records.
And personnel records too are in a locked space, but just wanting to confirm that vaccination cards are different. They're not really a medical record, but that is just another record separate from personnel records.
Right, they should be kept separate from the personnel files, okay? And I do have a question for Chase. Can I fire a worker who is not under a doctor's care but refuses to come back to work due to COVID risk? So they're scared they're going to contract COVID from coworkers, and they, decide I'm not coming back to work because of that. So can I fire them?
It's a good question, and I'm going to give you a lawyer answer, Katrina, which is it depends. Why are they afraid to come back to work? Is it because they have a pre-existing medical condition that puts them at greater risk of contracting COVID? If so, then I think we're in that scenario that we talked about earlier, where we have to consider whether we might accommodate them. But assuming that they don't have, a disability or some kind of medical condition that puts them at greater risk, then, you could, I guess, yes, you could terminate them if being at work, is an essential part of their job. Now, if they've been teleworking for the last year, plus, and they've been doing their job perfectly and you've had no issues with them, I think you're going to be hard pressed to terminate them. But generally speaking, if they just don't want to come to work, and I've been getting a lot of employers are saying, well, look, I can't get people to work, can't get people to come back to work because they're getting unemployment and they're making more in unemployment than they would be if they were working for me. If that's their reason, then yes, you can terminate them. But if they're concerned about if they have an underlying medical condition or they have some kind of disability, then that's something we need to consider. Now, we've been talking about vaccines, and so I think vaccines have really changed the landscape a lot from, when we were talking about these issues 6-12 months ago. Now most people have the option to get vaccinated. So if they're concerned about COVID risk, I think, first thing I would probably do is encourage them to get vaccinated if they haven't been already. And, at least the latest CDC guidance is the vaccines are very effective. So, so that would be an option I would certainly explore with the employee.
Okay, and also to Chase's point, you may want to, as an employer, report that to the unemployment office that they are refusing to come back to work, because that will affect their benefits.
Exactly right.
And so thank you so much, Chase, for that. I do want to ask, if I were to make reasonable accommodations for this person, or am able to afford to do that, would that be a better course of action for me than firing the person?
I would say so. I mean, throughout this pandemic, we've been encouraging employers to show a lot of grace to employees because we have been in uncharted waters. So let's, keep that in mind, and we have to show grace to each other too, because the guidance from the CDC and from other government agencies has been changing, especially early on from week to week. And even now we're still getting new guidance and things are changing. So I think let's be reasonable when we're responding, but if the employees, if we get this sense they're being unreasonable and we really need them, in the workplace, and they haven't been teleworking, then firing them is certainly an option.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chase. I have a question for Ashley. If I have an employee refusing to participate in temperature checks because she or he needs to feed their families, and should I comply with his or her wishes?
So you need to decide what your work rules are going to be regarding COVID moving forward. And you need to apply those rules equally to all persons. Currently, we are still in a place with COVID where you can do daily temperature checks of your employees. And if you're requiring that of one, you should require that of all. It is to make sure someone does not have COVID. That said, we're also at the place where I talked earlier about vaccination status. If you have employees and you're asking them if they're vaccinated, that would be another difference between vaccinated and unvaccinated employees as to what you do. But you should be treating everyone the same. Either you should be doing temperature checks or you should not be doing temperature checks. Look, the last thing you want is for someone to be positive for COVID-19 and have a fever and to be in your workplace just because they didn't want to get a temperature check because they need a paycheck. Understand that they need the paycheck, but you have a duty to provide a safe workplace to all of your employees under their general duty clause. So you can't just let one employee say, no, I'm not going to follow the safety protocols that you set in place. So what your safety protocols are need to be applicable to everyone.
Okay, great. Chase, I have a question for you. If an angry customer coughs on my employee, do I need to send them to be tested, or do I pay for that test?
Well, I guess the first issue is you've got a customer issue here. And this goes to Ashley's point earlier about your general duty to maintain a safe workplace under OSHA. I think the first thing you do is deal with the customer issue. If you've got a customer who's doing this just to spite because your employee's wearing a mask and they want to be difficult, I think you need to get the customer out of your business, and address that issue, because you want your employees to know that you care about them and you want to make sure they stay safe. So that's the first thing I would do. Do I send them to be tested? Do I pay for the test? Keep in mind that at least what we know about the science of COVID is that if you sent them to be tested right away, they're likely going to be negative. I mean, it takes about 5 days for a COVID test to be positive after exposure. So if, whether you send them to be tested or not, it's up to you. I don't think there's a legal requirement to test them, and there's no legal requirement to pay for it. If that's something you want to do, that's certainly something to consider, although be mindful that if you do it for one employee, you're setting a precedent, and you may end up paying for a lot of COVID tests. So, I guess the other thing to think about too, again, is the vaccine status of the employee. If the employee is fully vaccinated, then no, the guidance says there's no need for them to be tested unless they experience symptoms. So, I guess to summarize, I deal with the customer first, get the customer out of your workplace, reassure your employees that you care about them, you want to make sure they're safe, and then just talk to the employee about the issue and see how they feel and make sure they're comfortable. But there's no legal requirement to send them to be tested, and there's no obligation to pay for the test, because people cough all the time, and it most likely that person is not COVID positive.
Okay.
Yeah, I would also say if your employee is kind of panicking on you, don't forget, with a quick Google search, you can provide them with information where they could go get free COVID testing. We still have free COVID testing. With a Google search, you could just kind of give your employee that information if it would make them feel better to go get tested. And don't forget, again, under the FFCRA, you do still have, you can, if they do stay out because of this kind of testing time period, there is a way for you to get refunded for giving them that paid leave, but there's no requirement that you do it. So it may be that, a little grace and a little quick Google search back in your office and say, hey, why don't you go to this location? It's close to work. They'll give you a free COVID test. Could go a long way with employee morale, which is what a lot of this is making your employees realize and feel cared for as they come back to work. Some people have a high level of anxiety about coming back to work. Some people don't. And it's about managing that with your employees, which honestly right now can be very, very difficult. I'm on 2 different webinars this afternoon where the main topic is they can't get enough people to run their operations. They are desperate for workers. So if you have good workers right now, you know, don't throw them away, because it may be difficult to get some other good folks in the door. So don't forget about that for your small businesses. It's very difficult right now.
Agreed. Take care of your employees. So Ashley, if reasonable accommodations under ADA are going to cost me a significant amount of money, but I need people to work and I can't afford to make the accommodations, what should I do?
So first of all, remember the ADA only applies if you have an employee who has a disability. And don't forget that this is not some ad hoc thing that you do. The ADA has a process with it. And you work and fill out special forms between the employee and their doctor that explains to you what the accommodation is that that employee needs. You don't do this on your own. You're not doctors. You must work under the ADA process. And if you don't know how to do that, you need to give me your Chase call so we can walk you through it, because you can go sideways on it real easy.
Yeah.
But there is a point with any ADA and accommodation where you do look at the cost of the accommodation, and there is a place where a business just can't afford it, and then you do not have to make the accommodation. When we're talking about COVID though, the accommodation that we're seeing, the number one accommodation we're seeing is, I want to keep working from home. So when you talk about COVID in that specific accommodation, then we really have to talk about why you need your people to come back into the physical workplace. If it is for a true medical reason, right? They have one of the risk factors for COVID. You know, they're going through some kind of treatment that makes them more susceptible to COVID. And then we look at, have they been working from home this whole time? If they have, it can be harder to show why they must come back to be able to do their job. So it really depends. It is always an individualized analysis, but there is a place where you do have, it costs too much for the accommodation, but it is a process to get there. It is not employee walks in the office, says I have a disability, and you say, nope, too expensive, not paying for it. It is a process that you must go through to get it right, or you can be subject to some pretty expensive litigation if you do that one incorrectly on the front end.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'm going to take a short break and ask Carolyn. Carolyn, do you see any questions in the chat that you need to ask?
Excuse me, I had to unmute myself. Well, there is one from Costas. If there are any employees that may have a pre-existing condition that puts them at risk with the vaccine, does the business have an obligation to make them aware of an indirect exposure to COVID? For example, being around someone vaccinated who was in close contact with someone that has COVID.
So I'll take this one. So as far as the employer giving advice about risk symptoms for the vaccine, my answer to that is no, you don't have any obligations there. When the person goes to get their vaccination, I'm sure many of you are vaccinated, you know, they go through the risk factors before they give you the vaccination. That's for the vaccinator to do. I think in your example, what you're saying is Chase is not vaccinated. Ashley is vaccinated. I, Ashley, vaccinated, have come in close contact with COVID. The current science is that vaccinated employees are not carriers or spreaders of COVID. I think that's, you know, that's what they're telling us. It's pretty new proclamation they're making. But remember, under the rules, if you're treating your vaccinated and your unvaccinated employees differently, your unvaccinated employee should still be masked and should still be social distancing from me, because they are not vaccinated. So they are still being protected in the way a workplace can protect someone. You should also think about, like, if any of you are in customer facing, you know, service kind of industries, even if I am vaccinated, If I still want to wear a mask, you should let me. Even if I'm vaccinated. You know, I will tell you, I am vaccinated. My children are not vaccinated. There are some places that we go that I still put on my mask just because it makes me feel better. The science doesn't tell me to do that. It makes me feel better. Same thing for your employees. If you have servers, customer service, if they're vaccinated, but they still want to wear a mask, I think you should let them do that.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Ashley.
I agree. And one thing, just to go back to the question, you know, the CDC guidance on when to quarantine for unvaccinated people hasn't really changed a lot. So I Ashley mentioned this earlier. So if you have had exposure, you know, if an employee has had exposure and they're unvaccinated, the guidance is still 14 days or 10 days without any symptoms, or I think it's after 7 days if you have a negative test. So so keep those quarantine requirements in mind. They haven't changed for unvaccinated folks. And I think today it said something like, you know, only 40% of South Carolinians who are eligible for the vaccine still have actually been fully vaccinated. So there's still a lot of folks out there who aren't vaccinated.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm a small business. Should I offer some kind of hazard insurance to keep employees from complaining about customers not wearing masks while eating and drinking in my restaurant?
So I think that one was for me.
Uh-huh.
I mean, there's really
Either
no
one.
hazard insurance that I know of that covers that. You could talk to your agents about whether or not you want some kind of additional umbrella policy. But the truth of the matter is, again, we have a workers' liability shield legislation passed in South Carolina that protects you from this kind of liability as long as you are following the guidelines and as long as you aren't being grossly negligent, which is code for not following the guidelines. So as long as you are keeping up to speed with CDC and OSHA guidelines, you should not have any liability for this kind of issue. And again, if you're talking about eating and drinking, again, if you have unvaccinated servers, they should still be wearing their mask. If you have vaccinated servers and they're more comfortable wearing a mask while they're serving, they should be able to do that. But it's all about the same thing we've been doing for the last 18 months. Keeping up with the CDC and OSHA guidelines and implementing those guidelines in your workplace. And before last March, what we saw were guidelines coming out all the time, making things more restrictive. Now we're on the flip side of the coin, where we are seeing CDC and OSHA come out with new guidelines. I mean, not every day, but kind of infrequently, but it's to loosen the restrictions that we're seeing as COVID numbers go down. So, you know, I think it's about keeping up with the best practices of the day, which is following those CDC and OSHA guidelines that are out there. Their websites are free. They have 1, 2, 3 steps. Our DHAC department has guidelines for you that mimic those, that really try and explain it to you. They explain in great detail the difference in vaccinated and unvaccinated and what you should be doing. So, you know, as far as more insurance, I mean, I'm never going to tell you that not getting more insurance isn't good if you're a risk averse person. But you also need to really talk to your agents and make sure these things are covered, because we're starting to see COVID exceptions to things now. So you got to make sure it's covered anyway. But for this scenario, the liability shield that the state passed would protect you from this as long as you are not being grossly negligent in your safety precautions.
Yeah, and a lot of, I won't say a lot, but, you know, we were getting the question early on from employers of whether we should mandate vaccinations. And I think this scenario presents the issue of an employer who might consider potentially mandating vaccination for their employees. And the EOC has told us that yes, you can mandate that your employees get vaccinated. I'll tell you anecdotally that most employers are not doing that. But if you're a small restaurant, I mean, I've had a couple of restaurant clients that have said, you know, we really want to mandate vaccination because we're interacting with the public on a daily basis and we don't want, you know, we just want to be out in front of it. the EOC has said you can do that, but just like we've said earlier, you still have to consider the potential accommodations for medical reasons and religious reasons. So just bear that in mind if you are considering a policy that requires your employees to get vaccinated.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Chase. So I'm going to break in. Carolyn, are there any other questions in the chat?
No, thank you for asking. There still are a few people that they have given me their full name, but I don't see them on the registration list. So I've asked for a little bit of clarification on that. But I don't see any other questions. So we should invite people, Katrina, to ask anything that they may before we end our presentation today. So does anyone have any questions? And potentially if you'd like to unmute yourself or type it in the chat, that would be most helpful.
Yep. And so I will say this is Ashley. I'm just looking through the chat box. I see 1 or 2 folks in here that seem to be associated with health departments. If you are a hospital or a medical provider of any kind, make sure you read the new OSHA rules. They were just issued last week. They're on the OSHA website. The issue about vaccinated versus unvaccinated that Chase and I have been talking about, the rules we have been talking about apply to people outside of the medical industry. If you are in the medical industry, you need to go read the special rules that OSHA has just sent out for medical type people, hospital settings, because they are a little different. They're still more restrictive. They still want them wearing masks, doing that thing, and it more than what we were talking about before. We were really talking about non-medical related industries. So if you are, I just see 1 or 2 people with some medical touches, you're different. Go read the OSHA guidelines that just came. I think they came out, they were either Thursday or Friday. They're on the OSHA website. Medical is different, the rules for vaccinated, unvaccinated, than anybody else.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So with that said, we're coming to the close of our program. As Carolyn mentioned before, if you have a question, we invite you to unmute yourself and ask the question. You can still put it in chat if you like. Okay. So
And
we are going to finish.
Excuse me, Katrina, another reminder, we will be sending out a post-event survey to those that attended today that we could confirm their attendance. And we would certainly like you to respond to that. It's always helpful to our committee members and our other consultants when they're developing the topics as well as the format of these presentations. So please expect that post-event survey and please respond in kind.
Thank you so much, Carolyn, for that reminder. And again, we're finishing up a little bit early today, so I do appreciate all of you attending. And I especially want to say thank you to Ashley and Chase for your expertise in this area of COVID. I know we're in uncharted waters right now, and we're kind of navigating as we advise people on reopening. As Ashley mentioned, the rules are changing every day, and I think to stay on top of them, she gave some great advice on monitoring the OSHA website and stay on top of those changes. So thank you so much to Chase and Ashley for your knowledge and sharing that with us, and for our participants that have joined us today. We want to thank you, and you will be receiving a survey. Please take a moment to complete that. That helps us to continue to bring great programming like this. Thank you so much, and I'll let you get on with the rest of your day. So thank you. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.